Welcome to episode 22 of the Frograck Podcast. Amphibians eat invertebrates. Once appropriate housing and environmental parameters are set up, feeding is the major aspect of husbandry that we must provide captive amphibians. It is the aspect of keeping where we experience the most interaction with our animals. It is the ongoing aspect of husbandry that can have the greatest impact on our animals' health. Where I live, the only source of live invertebrate feeders are overpriced and often dead crickets from big box pet store chains. So I do regularly order crickets online and have them shipped, but for the sake of offering my animals a variety of feed to save some money, and because extreme weather sometimes makes shipping feeder insects impossible, I've been culturing my own feeder insects for as long as I've been keeping amphibians. The availability of invertebrate feeders has really improved in recent years. Small businesses, such as today's guest, are doing the work to culture large quantities of live insects for the hobby. Jordan from Ontario Invert Farm is doing just that. I'm really excited to welcome Jordan to the Frograck Podcast to hear about the insects that he cultures, to get some tips for how I can improve my own ability to culture insects and provide better nutrition to the amphibians in my care. Welcome Ontario Invert Farm to the show. Thanks for joining me today, Jordan. How are you?
Good, thanks. I'm happy to be here.
All right. Why don't you start by giving the audience, assume that they haven't found you on social media, don't know what you're up to. Who are you and what do you do in the herp hobby?
So, Ontario Invert Farm, the main goal of what I do is trying to cultivate and offer people alternatives to crickets and mealworms. It was the impetus for why I started the business, because back when I first started into this hobby, I was catching amphibians in my backyard, virtual backyard, in that redback salamanders, American toads, spring peepers, gray tree frogs. I was just fascinated by all of them. And then I came to find, as most people do, that the feeders in the store are very limited. It's grown in years, but it's still, we're taking animals that in the wild eat hundreds of species, and we're limiting it to one or two for their entire lives, and we expect them to be not only healthy but happy. In my mind, these animals, we don't know how much is going on in their heads.
Sure.
But I believe that environmental enrichment for these animals then comes largely from what we feed them.
Yeah.
And if you were just given the same thing every day, then I can't imagine that's a very fulfilling life. Or it wouldn't be a very healthy life, obviously.
Sure, yeah. It's at least, as you say, very different from what they would experience in the wild. And so it sort of puts the responsibility on us to do something about that as captive keepers, yeah.
100%. It's your animal's well-being as a keeper is largely dependent on you. And so I think that responsible keepers have the duty to ensure that their animals have fulfilling, content lives. And
Sure.
that largely comes with diet.
So obviously someone who as an adult is breeding lots of insects has an origin story. What was, you mentioned capturing some native amphibians when you were young. Do you have like a memory of what was one of the animals that you kept for a while? And were you just feeding it mealworms from the pet store?
One of the first ones that I found lots of and was just fascinated by were redback salamanders, which are so small that it's like, I was frustrated by pinheads. Just don't get me started on crickets unless you want a very long rant.
Yeah.
And so it felt incumbent on me to find foods that were small enough and could be used with that species. And then, I would say that after I started breeding my own, culturing my own feeders, that just when you come to know an animal, when you come to learn more about it, you get an appreciation for it. And I guess that appreciation grew with the insects and spawned a whole passion for it.
Right on. Yeah. So as far as getting your hands on feeders, whether you captured an American toad and you want to keep it in the house for a few days as a kid, or whether you have a frog room full of dart frogs and tree frogs or something like that, you sort of have three options, right? You can collect from the wild. You can go outside and try to find appropriate food items. You can buy at a pet store or online, even from people like yourself, or you can try to take on the responsibility and culture things yourself. So thinking through, like, talk me through those 3 ways of getting your hands on invertebrates, and just maybe each one has pros and cons, I imagine.
Mhm. They do. So as you mentioned, those are the 3 broad categories. The first, if you're wild collecting feeders, it has its positives in that you are getting insects that are high nutrition value, that are free, and you're getting that variety. Very important. You also need to know how to ID your insects, because not all insects are good to feed, and you need to know where you're getting them from, because you don't know where they've been. And I guess those are the 2 main ones for wild collected.
Yeah, you need to identify. People often bring up that there would be like potential exposure to pesticides and herbicides if you don't know where you're collecting it from.
Yes, so that's always a concern, and a valid concern too, because pesticide drift does go into the windrows, and it's like, yeah, you have to be sure that there's the potential for contamination is, you have to minimize that as much as you can.
Right.
And obviously you can't go into conservation areas and parks that are protected. So you do have to be very selective about where you're getting your field plankton from. Then the next category is, as you mentioned, getting them from an outside source, like a pet store or a business such as mine. You have to trust that the business that you're getting them from took care of them properly, raised them correctly and cleanly. And it's, yeah, that's one of the big things too, is that people seem to think that it's like, oh, I fed them crickets, why aren't they thriving? And it's like, why you have to make sure that you have that added vitamin dust,
Yeah.
because a lot of the time in the stores they're starved, or they're just fed bran. And it's like, if you think that is giving your animals the nutrition that they need, you're falling very short. And so it's finally, the last option is, in my opinion, the best option: raise them yourself, because you're not only quality control that at that point, you know what's going into your insects, which by transitive properties going into your animals. It's you're saving yourself money, as well as ensuring a sustainable and consistent supply of food for your animals too, which is important.
Right.
Because as you mentioned, like one of the main aspects of this hobby is keeping your animals fed. It's like, after you get things set up, which is it's a large initial cost, but the long-term maintenance and health of your animals is largely dependent on what you're feeding them.
Yeah, for sure. I'll go on a little tangent about crickets in stores without naming a company. I noticed a little while ago there's a company that markets crickets, and like you can either buy regular crickets from them or vitamin enhanced crickets that they have a proprietary name for. And I don't know what that actually means. I think it just means that they, fed it maybe some sort of cricket diet gut load right before shipping it off. But even then, I imagine that vitamin enhanced cricket, maybe it arrives to your house still with some nutrition in its gut, but it may also have just passed that, and you just spent money for another empty cricket. And then on the topic of gut loading, I remember, when I started off in the hobby as a kid too, I didn't even know what this was. Just a bug is a bug, feed it to your frogs. And then I got exposed to the idea of gut loading, and there was cricket diet products on the shelves of pet stores in the 90s. And now even today, I've come to appreciate that you can do even more than gut loading. Like if the cricket ate crap its whole life, but then a day before you feed it to your animals, you gut load it, that's better than nothing. But you also could have been feeding the cricket nutritious food its entire lifespan, and that actually makes a difference. So why don't we go down a tangent if you have any other thoughts on gut loading or just providing really good nutrition to the feeder insect itself?
Well, like you just mentioned, to give it just good food at the last minute is a little bit of an afterthought on the nutrition that the animal's getting while it's growing. And so there is definitely a difference, I would argue, in an animal that's been raised on a nutritionally sound and complete diet than one that's been vitamin enhanced at the last minute. Also, again, echoing what you said, in that it's like the time that the food stays in the gut of an insect isn't that long.
I imagine as much.
And so it's it's is very important to make sure that you're maintaining that quality through the whole rearing of the food for your animals, rather than just doing it as an afterthought. And so it's I guess as people, it's easy to appreciate the quality difference in that I've had chicken that's free range, and that chicken it's got flavor and it's
Yeah,
tasty.
right.
And for me, it's like, yeah, I like tasty chicken, but also the meat's actually nutritionally superior as well. You know, it's not just in a cage eating cracked corn. And so I don't have a nutritional breakdown in front of me, but
That's fine. Yeah.
you know, you
Yeah,
are
we
what you.
we don't need to nerd out about nutrition science because neither one of us are nutrition scientists, but I think chickens are a really good example. We keep laying hens, and so for years now, I think we've been kind of spoiled by free range hens that get only part of their diet comes from store bought grain, and maybe 50% of their diet comes from kitchen scraps and insects that they find outside. And everyone who has had farm fresh eggs knows the yolk is like really dark orange and tastes really nice. And then during the winter, when the chickens aren't laying as much, sometimes I break down and I buy store bought eggs, and they're so pale and flavorless. And so, you know, that's another chicken example that nutrition really, it's often hard for us to appreciate because we don't see it. It doesn't
Mhm.
make, you know, nutritional differences in the amphibians or reptiles we keep or in the feeder insects. Like you can't see it, touch it, or taste it. At least we can't. Maybe the frogs can. So it's often like something that we can overlook, but it's real. In our conversation earlier, you used the term mesofauna, and that's not a term I was familiar with. What do you mean by mesofauna? And for that matter, how do you define microfauna?
So like mesofauna is category of soil arthropods that are 0.1 to 2 millimeters in length. So whereas microfauna, you're talking about soil microbes and stuff you would need a microscope to observe.
Okay, yeah.
Whereas like mesofauna is springtails, mites, nematodes, all the stuff that's nearly microscopic that you just need like a magnifying glass to get a good look at. I'd say
Gotcha. Okay.
that's where the boundaries.
So in the hobby, when we call dairy cow isopods microfauna, we're sort of taking our liberties with that term.
Yeah, I'd say yeah.
Yeah.
You're taking a very liberal approach to using that term, but
Sure, sure. It's just become sort of a word. We all know what it means when we're using it in terms of our hobby. We joke around sometimes about the term bioactive, that it has come to mean something as simple as like a corn snake keeper put springtails in their cypress mulch bedding, and so now, ta-da, my tub is bioactive. And then people like to disagree about it or roll their eyes about it, but no one has a nailed down definition. But I think everyone agrees that the term bioactive means that there's more life in your terrarium than just the animal inhabitant. And so, what role do invertebrates, and ranging from micro, meso, and larger, what role do invertebrates play in bioactive terrarium keeping?
I'd say that your invertebrate aspect is probably one of your most important aspects of a bioactive terrarium, because what you're doing with bioactive is you are trying to recreate an ecosystem. So when you think about it, it's like back when we first had zoos, we kept animals in sterile cages, just bars, and maybe like threw a ball in there with it, and you just had an animal in a box. And that's basically a prison. No one wants to see an animal in a box. It's sad.
Yeah.
And it's not fulfilling for the animal either. And so people are coming to, like, modern zoos are not that. People have their pros and cons against it, but zoos will always be necessary in a conservation role, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's on a personal level, you are creating enclosures the animal interacts with. It's not just an animal in a box. And so you're creating a micro ecosystem. And the fundamental part of that is the decomposers, the nutrient recyclers, the role that the invertebrates play in helping the whole thing move along. It's not just a planted tank. Although plants also play their role in it. It's like I said, it's creating a small system.
Right. What okay, so what are other than just springtails and isopods, what are other possible decomposers that would work in various, reptile or amphibian habitats?
So one of the overlooked ones that when you say mites, a lot of people get antsy because it's easy to just think of the bad ones.
Yeah.
But there's orbited mites, which are also called moss mites, and these mites play an enormous role in soil formation and nutrient recycling. And I believe from what I've read, might be one of the things that give dart frogs where they gain their poison from is from eating these mites, which again, they're fine shredders. So you have inverts like isopods and certain snail species and beetles that break down waste and leaf litter, and then that gets broken down further by the mesofauna, which is small enough to help break that down so it's a usable source of nutrients for the plants and helps break down wastes like ammonia.
Right. I imagine, sometimes mites get in your springtail cultures and isopod cultures, and we don't like that because we were trying to stay in control and culture a specific invertebrate, but you get a mite boom because they like the same conditions and serve the same role in soil as the springtails do, huh?
So in my springtail colonies, and I do a lot of springtails. I offer at least 6 different species, and I'm working on more. Like we were sort of discussing before, I've sort of really gone on to springtails. I find them just fascinating. But the mites that tend to get in are Simitis mites. I'm awful with the scientific names.
I've never heard a scientific name of a mite before, so it'd be news to me.
These mites are, I call them soil lions because they will eat it's dozens and dozens of soil pests. They go after thrips, they go after grain mites, they go after snake mites, they go after fungus gnat, they go after anything that's small enough for them to attack, they'll eat. And then they will also eat algae and plant debris. And so it's when you get these mites, they love eating springtails because that's small enough for them. And so their numbers eventually grow.
Gotcha.
And if you don't have a very prolific species, then you can find yourself with just a bin of mites.
Yeah, right.
And so I understand the frustration of it is, if you're just doing a monoculture of anything, you're going to have the predators of that get into it eventually, and you're going to have to do mitigation or learn some how to at least manage their numbers as best you can.
Right.
So
right.
yeah, mites like that, it's like what's a bad mite for me might be a good mite for you, because you don't want fungus gnats in your tank. They look ugly. They eat plant roots. They fly in your nose and on your face. Right. So it's like that's a great mite for dealing with fungus gnats. In the right situation, they can be good, but then in the wrong situation, you want them gone.
Yeah. When we're thinking of small invertebrates helping sort of deal with waste, right? Deal with the feces from frogs in a frog tank, for example. They're sort of like maintaining the substrate, probably moving around in it, aerating it, dealing with waste. A misconception might be that they literally eat poop. Do you know, down there in the soil diversity web, what's really going on with things like springtails and isopods when they are, cleaning up feces?
So I think that's kind of like a bit of a misconception about bioactive tanks. People get the idea it's like, oh, if I make it bioactive, I don't have to clean. I'm like,
right.
That's not accurate. The bioactive tank means you have to clean less. Means but you still have to spot clean. But for animals as small as dart frogs, it's like, yeah, you do need something that is helping to break down the waste. And so larger invertebrates, and that's where isopods come in, do help break down the waste material, the poop and stuff left behind by animals as small as dart frogs. And then beyond that, you have to break it down further, which is where you have the mites and the springtails start to do their work there. Because just having isopods alone isn't going to cut it. I would actually argue that springtails are probably, I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent here, but like springtails, if you have a bioactive setup, you need springtails.
Yep.
Terrariums they're just set for mold formation. You're going to get mold if you don't put in methods to control it. And so springtails are ideal in that they're small enough that they can eat mold spores. There's other invertebrates that I'm working on too. There's minute fungus beetles, which are also only a couple millimeters long that eat spores. But you have to have something that's going to work on reducing the amount of mold formation that you get, because in the still air and humidity of a terrarium, it's a matter of when, not if. Yeah.
Right.
You need to get on top of your mold.
Right. I think dart frogs, the experience that someone gains when they keep dart frogs can be misleading, because dart frogs do so well in really small bioactive setups. I'm not exactly sure why that is. I'm just thinking out loud with you here. It maybe be because their skin is highly evolved to be down in the leaf litter, and so maybe they have like a really high tolerance for like bacteria and fungus and mold being on their skin a lot. And so it's not necessarily the case that every single one of us who keeps dart frogs has done such a good job recreating nature that it's the perfect, pristine ecosystem. And so our dart frogs thrive. I think maybe it's just that the dart frogs are very resilient to the conditions of a, glass enclosure full of rotting leaves and their own poop. And the springtails definitely just help that web. But then when people scale up to other species, it often doesn't go as well. Maybe usually what people cite as the reason why it doesn't work out is that the waste load of larger animals is just too much to handle.
Yeah. Would say, yeah, you when you scale up like that, you also need to remember that you have to have enough invertebrates in there to help manage with the additional waste. It's like, if you think a springtail is going to be able to take on the waste of a ball python, you're going to be very disappointed early on. Or even, you can use almost any example, because once the larger the animal, the larger the poop, right? And so you do start needing, that's when the spot cleaning would come in more.
Mm-hmm.
You're never going to get a fully functioning ecosystem within a tank. You just won't, because it's a closed system. With adding invertebrates to help with that, you're trying to mimic it as closely as you can, but you'll never get there fully. And it's hard to get a really good balance sometimes, because if you have like dairy cows are great in that they'll eat almost anything organic. They breed well, they're hardy, they can live on almost anything. That works well if you have enough for them to eat. If you don't and you have them in a planted tank, then all your plants start disappearing, and you get a balance, and then they start breeding, and then you just have a tank of largely just dairy cows. So and I guess in addition to having the right amount of micro and mesofauna, it's also making sure you have the right substrate too.
Yep.
Substrate is a vastly overlooked aspect of bioactive tanks, I would say, in that they're not all made equal, and people all seem to have this obsession with cocoa fiber, which is, I don't know, it can be part of your substrate, but it shouldn't be the only thing your animal's living on. Sorry, I don't want to get too carried away on a tangent.
That's right.
Once we start talking bugs, I just go.
Yeah.
But it's the complexity of the system you're creating. And like I said, you'll never match it completely. So you as the keeper still have to do maintenance. Bioactive doesn't mean no cleaning. It just means less cleaning and a more pleasant environment for the animal to be living in.
Yeah. Including maintenance, including occasionally changing substrate when it just has decomposed beyond its usefulness, or adding leaf litter frequently, which sort of mimics what happens in nature. Yeah.
Leaf litter is I like, you can't go wrong adding leaves a lot
Yeah.
of the time. I've always said that. It's like most of my tanks have leaf litter in them. Whether the animals use it directly, eat it directly, or just use it as shelter. Leaf litter is always a plus.
I'm always so jealous when people down south post pictures of live oak or magnolia bushes in their front yard. I'm always like, man, nice endless source of really good leaf litter. That must be nice.
Yeah, really.
All right, beyond springtails and isopods, you culture and work with a lot of different insects, both feeders and sort of like curiosities. So why don't you give us a big overview of different, list of different species of insects that you work with, and then I'll start asking you some questions about specific ones.
Let's see. So some of the main ones that are like my focus, in addition to the bioactive species, would be Dormancy beetles, which are popular for taxidermy. These beetles are almost like a little land piranha, where if you put a skull in with them, they'll just cover it and eat everything but the bone. And then that's how you get a nice specimen for mounts. And they're so effective at their job, and they do such a good job that they're still used by museums. Museums have big freezers full of these beetles, and so that's one of my focal species. Another one is American giant millipedes. I don't know. I guess I haven't looked at the face of other millipedes under the microscope, but American millipedes have giant millipedes just have these adorable, they're just little black round eyes. They look almost cartoonish, and just watching them move is fascinating. They are all around probably one of my favorite native species to work with.
So much
Great
better than centipedes. Millipedes are way better. Centipedes creep me out.
I always say that the giant centipedes are nightmare fuel, whereas giant millipedes are the cow version. Just adorable and fun.
Right.
So let's see. Other interesting species are I raised giant silk moths. That's a lot of work, but at the end, seeing these animals in person they're just stunning. Cecropia moths, the largest native giant silk moth species we have. Wingspan that easily is length of my palm, and just gorgeous coloration. They only live for about 7 days as an adult because they don't have any functional mouth parts.
Wow.
That whole week is just dedicated to reproduction. And so when you raise these animals, you come to appreciate that the life of a caterpillar is eating and pooping,
right,
and resting. In relation to that, I also raise domestic silkworms, which are the only fully domesticated insect that we have.
Right.
And that's another animal that is genuinely, I love learning about the history of it and appreciating just like the amount of silk you need to make a shirt even is enormous. You need thousands of cocoons. And like I said, if you know what goes into raising caterpillars, which just eat and poop, you are either fetching them food or cleaning up their poop. And the amount of work that silkworm farmers must go in, put into these animals, it's like now you understand why silkworms are a dollar a piece, which is pricey for a bug. And then beyond that, I guess slightly smaller scale, I also raise other more like pet specimens. So I like doing buy a group of tarantula slings, raise them up, and then sell off most of them, except I keep one or two as my pets afterwards. And so yeah, I raise the food, and I raise the bugs that eat them. And then I also do have a couple reptile pets myself. Unfortunately, when I moved away, like in universities, when I had the height of my collection, my parents, I guess, reasoned that if he's keeping reptiles and amphibians, at least he's not going out and doing drugs and joining gangs. Yeah, it's with the amount we pay for hydro in Ontario, I'm surprised that my parents let me have as many tanks as I did.
Yeah.
But when I moved off to go to university, my parents said, we'll take care of your sugar gliders, but we're not doing the rest of this all. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, had to rehome a lot of that, but still have a couple of the now I'm living on my own. I'd of course go and get a leopard gecko and well, I guess the only amphibian species that I keep right now is a cane toad.
Oh, sweet. What does that eat?
Anything it can fit in its
Everything.
mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's only a year old and it's already like sizable toad.
Yep.
And it one of my go-tos now that I'm cricket free for years, thankfully,
Yeah.
is I love roaches. I'm team roach all the way.
Right.
They're cleaner. They don't smell's not there. The noise isn't there. They're easy to breed. They are nutritionally superior.
They stay alive better.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Because, in the tank, crickets will only live for like a week unless they escape, and then they'll hide under your heaviest appliance and chirp forever to remind you that you were going to kill them. But yeah. Oh, and so just like mites, when people hear roaches, they immediately think, "Oh, I wouldn't want those in my house." Like, no. There's over 4,000 species of cockroach globally.
Jeez. Yeah.
And like probably less than 12 of them are actually problematic. Even the species that can be a pest problem, at least in Canada, I find really there's only one that is a major problem, and that's German roaches. But American roaches are, in my opinion, an outdoor species that accidentally ends up indoors and under the right circumstances can be problematic, especially if you're from a warmer climate.
Right.
But by and large, they're not chewing into you have to have a dripping faucet. You have to have crumbs everywhere. You have to have food and water available for them to become problematic. German roaches, though, yeah, that's a whole different horse.
What is it about German roaches that make them so robust that they can infest a house?
Their size, the size of like their Ootheca,
Mm-hmm.
the egg cases they're so small that it's very easy to miss that, even if you're doing pesticide application. These days, our pesticides are not as broad spectrum. They're more targeted, which often means that sometimes these pesticides aren't even getting to all stages. What might kill the adults and the nymphs might not work on the eggs. And so when you have a species that small, it doesn't require much food. It's a lot more adaptable to taking advantage of the situation rather than a larger species that also has need for more food, water, all these sort of
I imagine that maybe a German roach can breed easily even in like suboptimal temperatures.
That's another big part, is that they do fine where at room temperature. Whereas I have a couple varieties of American roach. They're special though. They're the different color morphs that you can get.
Cool. Yeah.
So yeah, I have some that are white eyes and a morph called Venom, which is mentalistic and also has the white eye mutation. And so it's a black roach with white eyes.
That's kind of cool.
That's so cool. Trying to get them to breed is actually, you need a fair bit of heat.
Right.
You're not gonna get that in northern states or in Canada. Largely, they're not as much of an issue. Whereas, like you mentioned, German roaches are just fine. If you're fine, they're cool.
Yeah. Right. What are some mistakes people make when using different feeder insects in really elaborate bioactive setups? Like what has the potential of going wrong there?
What has the potential of going wrong?
I'm thinking roaches living in your substrate and growing too big.
That's definitely an issue. One of the roaches that I work with that I love as a feeder, Suriname roaches, they're great. They're a soil roach. So that means that they get out, their water retention's awful. They'll just die within about like 48 hours. You'll find dead ones on the floor. dried up. But because they're soil roach, as soon as they hit soil, they're burrowing. That means it's out of sight of your animal.
Right. That's
They're
sort of what I'm thinking.
also a greenhouse pest. And so it's like you have a roach that's burrowing, that's feeding on your plant roots, that's parthenogenetic, so it clones itself.
Okay.
And the nymphs are tiny. So if one gets in there, it just takes one, that it's like you plant the tank, you'll notice over time it'll start to decline. And then you'll also notice that there's suddenly the soil's moving a lot more. And then if you do some investigation, you'll see why your plants aren't doing so hot. That's probably one of the big drawbacks to Surinams. So while they are an awesome low maintenance roach, love using them, it's very situational. There's species that's best you like feed them off with tongs. So I know my animal's
Right.
getting bit directly, and yeah, there's no chance for that Suriname to hide, because that throws off your feeding schedule. The animal's not getting fed on time, and then the nutritional profile changes the longer the roach isn't eating what you're feeding it, right?
Right.
I've also had other inverts where it's like I thought it was going to be a good addition, and then it ends up that this insect started eating the plants in the tank because it didn't have what I was feeding it before. So it's
Okay.
starving, and now it's starting to chew holes in my plants, and I didn't realize it was the diet was that broad for that species. So it's a lot of my knowledge base for this has been obtained through trial and error, because there's not a lot of information out there right now. This is still like a relatively young hobby, right? So it's you got to be careful with what you're adding to your tanks sometimes, or you have to take the time to make sure you have feeding methods that ensure that you're making the animals getting the food when you give it to them, and that the feeder is not just walking around the house doing what it wants on its own time.
Sure. Let's stay on roaches. We'll move into sort of my questions about culturing. Other than dubia, what's a species of roach that you think hobbyists like myself could pick up and give a try at culturing?
Because you're in the US, you have so many more options.
Okay.
Like I'm genuinely jealous.
Right.
Red runners
Mm-hmm.
are a great food source. They like it really hot. They only get to the size of roughly like a house cricket. They're soft bodied. That is definitely one I highly recommend people look into. And because they're such a high heat species, it's like if they get out, you really don't need to worry about it. What for Canadians, the government has been they're very restrictive on what exotic insects they will allow people to use.
Right.
With some justification. It's like you don't want it getting out and becoming an agricultural pest.
Fear
But
of
the fact
agriculture,
that you guys can keep tropical roaches in the northern states and not have them be a problem, but suddenly if they were used in Canada, the government thinks that it would be an issue. I'm like, but just recently they say it was less than 3 years ago, maybe, that they legalized discoid roaches.
Okay.
So for Canadians, that's a big one that we're excited for.
So Canada and Florida are all about the discoid roaches.
And it's funny you mentioned Florida, because discoids have been used for so long that a lot of the stock in both America and in Canada now they're hybridized, and so these discoid roaches are so closely related to death head roaches and Parabolicus and some other species that look basically versions of discoid roaches that in the course of using them as feeders, they end up being hybridized. And when you hybridize within a species, that gives it hybrid bigger. You're giving it genetic diversity. That's a plus.
Yeah.
When you hybridize between species, that's when you start coming to problems, because in some aspects it might be good. So when you hybridize a horse and a donkey, you get a mule, stronger, but also infertile, because it doesn't have the same chromosome number. And so with these hybrid roaches, the issue that is really coming up is that they are very slow, like slow growing, and also the fertility is impacted. And so there is a company down in the States called Roach Crossing, where the owner actually went down to uh, 2 locations in Florida that these discoid roaches got out and established feral populations. And it
Right.
was so early on. It was before all these other roaches were brought in that hybridized. And so it's sort of almost like a time capsule of these purebred populations.
Right.
And yeah, he went and he collected them. I believe the one was a resort called Banana Bay, and the resort ended up being demolished. And I think that it might have ended up leading to the demise of that feral population. But yeah, he spirited away those individuals and those purebreds. So I have both hybrid discoids and purebred discoids, and there is a difference. The one variety, Redlands, grows much faster. The other one, Banana Bay, has great fertility. The hybrids seem to have the worst of both worlds. And so it's while we're getting towards better feeders, I feel like the discoids almost kind of flopped a bit
Okay.
when they first came on the scene here, because the initial imports were genetic trash. It took 5 months to get a generation, and that's far too long for a practical feeder insect.
Right.
Crickets, you can raise 2 or 3 generations of crickets in that amount of time.
Yeah.
So it's unfortunate, but there's also no perfect feeder insect. And so that's why it's important. The key with creating a good diet for your animal, I'd say, is tied to the diversity of what you're feeding it.
Mhm.
You just feed it one thing, you're not going to be checking off all the boxes for it. It's like, yeah, you can get close with some feeders, but then it's not enough. So I think that for an ideal situation, you want as much diversity in the diet as possible, as practically possible.
For our Canadian friends listening who do have access to discoids as one of their few options, how are they different? To me, I can't visually tell the difference between dubia and discoids, especially as nymphs. But just because they look the same, do you keep them the same? Do you sort of culture them the same? How would you set up like a small home, DIY culture of discoids?
So because the discoids are a longer lived species, and they are very similar to dubia. Dubia are a little bit smaller and they culture a little bit faster,
Okay,
but there's a lot of overlap.
gotcha. Yep.
I'd say though one of the main differences is that I personally feel that discoids need substrate to dig in as
Mhm.
nymphs. They burrow extensively, and having substrate helps keep the humidity high. You need the humidity high if you're going to do well with the species. A lot of people that are having trouble, it comes down to 2 major points, is that you're not keeping them hot enough. They need 25 to 30. I don't know what that is in American. See, over 80.
Over 80. We're smart enough
Yeah,
to do the conversion.
you guys are. I'm just a simple bug farmer.
Yeah.
And then yeah, pair that with the high humidity. They like 60 to 70% humidity.
Okay.
And so if you're doing that in a bare bottom tank, you're gonna be struggling. If you're doing that with egg cartons for their hides, you're gonna get mold.
Yeah, that's gonna go bad fast. Yeah.
And so I keep my discoids almost like pets. They're not pets. They don't get, well, some of them get individual names. But no, they are in tanks that actually have like bark and substrate, and uh they get fresh fruits and vegetables. I don't keep them like I would crickets, or there's certain insects that you can culture in a more sterile environment, like
Right.
fruit flies.
Yeah.
But for other ones, you're going to want to mimic. You're going to want a tank that makes it look like It's a pet. You gotta keep it nice. And when you do that, the animals are less stressed. And when you have, this applies to anything, when it's less stressed, it's gonna do better. And so yeah, my discoids, like the leaf litter. Leaf litter's in all the tanks. Because even if it gives them something to chew on, gives them something to hide under. The more naturalistic setup, I would say, for discoids is where you're going to get better returns than if you try to raise it like it is a cricket.
Right, right. I imagine keeping substrate and a higher humidity culturing tub for discoids. People probably don't like that because then it's difficult to harvest like large quantities all at once to feed out a whole bunch of like nymphs of the same size since they're in substrate.
That's true. It does take more effort to harvest. I don't have a good planner for that. It's going to be a little bit more work. Now you can get screens, which actually is my method. Is I just screen them out, and
Yep.
honestly, you don't need that fine of a screen because the nymphs are at least quarter inch, a little smaller, and so I guess no, they'd probably be a little bit smaller than that even, but your substrate can go through a screen, the nymphs won't, and it's
Right.
like, yeah, you're gonna have to screen them out, but they'll be your survival rate goes up when you have substrate, because of the lowering of the stress.
Yep. What do you
The more, sorry,
what do you like to feed your roaches? So when you're culturing roaches, I imagine you're giving them a really good complete diet. They eat almost anything. So what's in your routine for feeding all your roach colonies?
one of the keys is that they need produce, because I don't give my roaches access to water. Insects drown in like a very small amount of water. It's one of my beefs with crickets is that you can have crickets in a room size enclosure. Actually, I used to work on a cricket farm too. It's part of where I got the hate. And there were these troughs that they had where they would give them the water, and it's literally just a very, very, very small amount of water going down these troughs, and crickets would just die.
Yeah.
They would just drown in it. And it's like, you can put a tiny film of water in a cup in a far side of the room, and the cricket will just, I don't know, they're drawn to it. It's like they just need to get in there. And so a large portion of the moisture requirements is obtained from the diet, and you need to have fresh produce. Like you mentioned, roaches aren't particularly picky. If you want to see them go nuts, you give them a little bit of protein, and they love eating fish flakes. That's like roach crack for them.
Right.
And the protein, shouldn't be a very large portion of the diet, because now actually we're finding that when you feed roaches too much protein, they sequester it as oxalic acid, and that can actually create gout in your captive animals.
Okay.
If you feed them high protein roaches. So it's important to that's another reason why you should culture your feeders at home if you can. Is you don't know what the feeders have been fed before they came to you. So speculate on what a nutritionally improved cricket is, but we don't know what they're feeding it, and so we've just got to go on their word. And I very just recently found out about the effects of feeding too much protein to roaches and the negative consequences it has for your captive.
Interesting. Yeah.
Now I'm sure there's other aspects of in the same vein that we don't always know the consequences of what we do, the actions of what we feed our animals and what it impacts them down the line.
Right. Yeah. There's so much more to learn here. All right. Moving on from roaches, I think I'd like to try culturing peanut beetles. I think I have some in a tub of red runners. They're a small dermestid beetle of some sort. So I think I think I should isolate them and give them a try. And the reason I like it is because if I can, and maybe you can give me some tips, if I can find a efficient way of harvesting a peanut beetle larva, they're nice and small for like metamorphosed newts and fire-bellied toads, which even sorting out and finding the smallest mealworm is usually too big for them. So tell me about culturing peanut beetles, and especially if you have any tips on how to harvest the larva.
Absolutely. So peanut beetles, great choice. Very great nutritional profile on those. And they do have a little bit of a lower chitin than yellow mealworms. So also another plus. What makes me smile a lot of the time is that because of their common name, a lot of people seem to, they're like, they need peanuts. And I'm like, they don't actually need, you're just making expensive feeders, by, you, what I find for peanut beetles is they will do just fine on rolled oats. Keep them dry, and I have literally just raised my peanut beetles on oatmeal before. And then the best way to harvest them is, I'm all about the screen and sieve.
Yep.
If you use a substrate that like oats, then it is relatively simple to get a decent amount of larvae falling through that, whatever you use to sieve it out. Because the larvae obviously are smaller than the diameter of a rolled oat. And
Yep.
then if you have a bunch of frass that comes through with them, well, then just get a fine sieve.
Gotcha.
Frass will pass through. You keep the worms, and then rub it's your mother's brother.
Nice. Okay. Cool. Do they need moisture? Do you throw a carrot in with them the way that you do with mealworms?
While they do, obviously they'll mob it if you put in a carrot. They don't necessarily require carrot, because one of the neat things about these beetles, and mealworms too as well, actually, darkling beetles in general are able to sequester moisture from the air.
Cool.
And so I've kept generations dry.
Yep.
They don't need a source of moisture like that. However, they do a little bit better if you do provide a carrot. Mind you, you have to keep it, like the setup that you're raising them in, very ventilated. As soon as moisture gets into that substrate, then you're asking for mite problems.
Sure, I can see that. I can imagine that.
Because that's one of the things that I've had to deal with over the years is, like, I'll defend the name of mites for the good ones, but like grain mites are just, they're awful. I wouldn't wish that on anyone.
Yeah, real nuisance. Right.
It's like, and yeah, it's like once you see one, the next thing you know, you'll see billions. They cover every surface, and they're awful, and they're just like, even if they're not directly hurting my animals, they are definitely causing problems just by all the numbers.
Yeah.
But so the number one way to keep away from mites becoming a problem is keep your moisture down. So yeah, you can add a carrot, or you can add a chunk of potato if you want, because that will improve the longevity of the adult beetles.
Okay.
That'll improve the amount of eggs that the female can produce. But you make sure that, keep that ventilation high, because you're obviously gonna keep the temperature up as well, because while they can breed and survive at normal room temperature, they do a little bit better if you give them a little bit more heat. But yeah, obviously heat and moisture, it's a dangerous combination.
Can get pretty gross in there. Yeah. Another insect I have a question about is mantids. It can make an okay feeder as a feeder insect. Obviously, like the hatchlings right out of the Ootheca might be appropriate for certain animals. But I've never tried to culture. I know people keep mantids as pets and probably reproduce them in captivity, but I've only ever dealt with them by just finding Ootheca in the wild, usually in like August and September, and bringing them inside. But I must be doing something wrong, because I do not get good hatch rate from wild collected mantid Ootheca. Do you have any tips on that?
Okay, so I guess the first, I should say, while I offer Ootheca, I don't breed mantids.
Sure.
It's a fair amount of work, and so it's the amount of work that goes into breeding them successfully would sort of negate their usefulness as turning those insects into feeders. But wild collected ooths, yeah, that's a good food source right there, and especially because you can control the situation right off the bat. It's technically a wild collected feeder, but you don't have to worry about pesticides or any of that. When you hatch out the ooth, when the eggs are in the ooth, you don't need to worry about the humidity quite as much. But when you are hatching them, you need to make sure that you do have the RH up high enough, because these mantids, any insect that small, desiccates super quickly.
Right.
And so I find the best way to hatch out these oots is usually I get like a 32-ounce deli, and then put a moist paper towel in the bottom, and then put the ooth in, and then usually if you're keeping it at room temperature, you're gonna see something in between 3 and 6 weeks. Usually, the humidity is absolutely key when you have hatching, because it's as soon as that ooth opens, then the nymphs are depending on the air humidity. Before that point, whatever that foam the female mantid sprays around it, that's like ideal insulation. So yeah, I would say increase the humidity, and you might see a slightly better hatching rate. But it's also dependent on the fertility, whether the female actually got to mate before laying those eggs. And so I have a really good spot to get these oots.
Nice.
It's between 3 vineyards, so the bird bangers keep the birds from getting to the adult
Right,
mantids,
right.
and it's a mantis mecca. They
Cool.
love it there, and the
Cool.
very, very high fertility in those oots.
Where we live, we get pretty extreme winters, and the ooths make it through the winter and hatch out in the spring, if I understand the natural history correctly. Is a cold dormancy required to get an ooth to hatch? Like if I collect some in like September, does it need to experience cold, or would I be able to just bring it inside and hatch it in 6 weeks?
From my experience, at least, so I've never tried to hatch it without the winter diapause, or winter rest.
Yeah.
Although, from my experience, some species don't actually require it. Northern walking sticks, which are the only species of phasmid that we get up here in Canada.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, one of two. There is another one. But anyways, that species, if the eggs are warm long enough, the babies inside just are like, well, I guess we'll hatch. And
Yep.
so they will hatch without that diapause requirement. It's just they don't synchronize with their brothers and sisters. It's they all just sort of pick their own best time to go out, and there are problems with not having that diapause in there, in that it doesn't, you have a random age stratification. Mantids, I believe that at least some cold period is required. I don't know how long that period has to be. So another example, like Cecropia moths and other species that are adapted to northern climates, they do require that cold period in order to successfully complete their development, which I'm speculating may be similar to the ooths. Now, because they are a species that is an introduced species, they may be a little bit more flexible in their requirements. Usually, the minimum amount of winter rest that a lot of species require, from my experience, is about 8 weeks. That's like domestic silkworms.
Sure.
And I would probably, again, speculation, I would think that the mantids are probably similar to that too.
Yeah.
You can go out and collect an ooth in December. It's probably been cold long enough for it that you'll get a hatch. But maybe that's another thing that I would consider if you're looking to improve your hatch rates from the ooths you collect. May just make sure that they have that full amount of cold dormancy.
Yep.
To trigger that hatch.
At least a few weeks of it. Yeah. So when I think about tree frogs, I don't even know if I'm right about this. I imagine maybe some of their diet comes from caterpillars, but on the same token, so many caterpillars have defensive mechanisms that make them unpalatable, whether it's like the little hairs or, bright colors and poison and whatnot. But to solve that problem, we have a domesticated moth, domestic silkworm. So deep dive me into where did silkworms come from? Why are they domesticated? And then maybe transition to their life cycle before we start talking about them as feeders.
For sure. Silkworms were first domesticated in China. These are the source for commercial silk, which has a material for making your clothes. It's like, yeah, that was one of the best you can get back then, which is why it was so closely guarded. The Chinese, the emperors would execute anyone who was trying to remove the eggs from China. And so it was, I believe, some Tibetan monks at one point smuggled eggs out of China in hollowed out walking staffs to get them to the outside world. These moths have been so extensively selectively bred that they have, well, most people are familiar with the all white version,
Yeah.
which is one of the typical signs of domestication is the animal loses its camouflage. But we've also bred them to have different colored silk, which I find fascinating. I worked with varieties of silkworm that naturally spin golden silk, that spin green silk, that spin pink silk. It's, yeah, fascinating.
Cool.
How many different varieties of silkworm are out there? Most people are only familiar with the one that's commercially used as feeders, but there are hundreds and hundreds of varieties in China. And the closer you get to an animal's domestication origin, the more varieties you're going to find. But broadly speaking, we have bred it so that the moths don't fly. Now, female moths being flightless in their adult stage is not uncommon amongst the wild species, but the males being flightless is not, because the males go find the females emitting the pheromones and mate with them. And we took care of that, and we said, no, don't worry. We got you covered. And the males don't fly either. The wings barely give them enough lift to move around. Because their abdomens are so fat. Beyond that, we've made it so that, like, domestication isn't just physical changes. There are behavioral and physiological changes that happen where anyone who's kept a caterpillar, if it runs out of food, the caterpillar's going to go that entire container looking for something to eat. And if you have it in a big cage, it's going to search that whole cage looking for its food plant. Silkworms don't do that. Silkworms are so domesticated that you can keep them in an open tray. They won't go further than 6 inches looking for their food. After that, they just throw up their hands and they give up. Well, yes, guess there's no more food.
Guess I'm going to die.
Yeah, that's basically it. Because if once caterpillars stop eating, the clock starts ticking, and it's lights out if they don't get fed soon enough. And so it's equivalent of our cattle and our horses don't jump the fences. We've domesticated them so that they don't have that urge to escape, just isn't there. And so these caterpillars are the insect version of cattle. They don't go looking for their food. They expect it to be brought to them. So it's amazing that human beings have worked alongside animals for so long that we become interdependent. We use them for, obviously, the silk, which is an amazing material that is not only soft, it's waterproof, and it's got so many good qualities to it that I see why there was interest in creating a stable, dependable domestic supply of that. I guess it always going off on a slight tangent here.
That's right.
The domestication process is just fascinating me, because when you look at the wild version of things and you think to yourself, we as early human beings looked at that and thought to themselves, I bet we can turn that into something that can work alongside with us. And the only thing that people tend to selectively breed for early on is its tolerance to human beings. Can it stand to be around us? And with things like they've done domestication experiments with foxes in Russia. I'm not sure if you've ever heard about this experiment, but it's fascinating in that the researchers only picked for foxes that weren't afraid of them or aggressive. They picked up for people-friendly foxes. And then traits like floppy ears, different coloration, curly tails, like things started happening to the foxes that they weren't selecting for, but just by shrinking that gene pool and just selecting for foxes that want to be around people, you start seeing neat traits start to crop up. And I've always just found that fascinating, that I guess, and the fact that we did with insects, and we've done it with so many different species is I think just got kind of neat.
So before I took an interest in silkworms as a possible feeder insect, I actually became aware of their food source, the domesticated mulberry tree, because I do sort of some homesteading agriculture type things, big garden, big orchard. And in the world of what's known as permaculture, it's people who are just looking at all sorts of plants and ecosystems and how to create, not monocrop agriculture, but how to create a type of agriculture where there's a lot of symbiosis going on between different plant clades and even wildlife. And mulberry trees can play a really good role in a permaculture orchard. And they also are known as a fodder crop because they're very palatable to things like goats. And the leaves can even be fed to pigs. And the leaves, what got homestead type people so interested in mulberry trees isn't just the little fruit is great. Humans can eat mulberry berries. It's kind of cool that it's a full-size tree that makes an edible sweet berry, but so can your livestock. Just put chickens under the tree and they'll clean up every berry. And then the leaves are high in protein. So it's an amazing, very versatile tree. And the reason the tree is so versatile is because of domestication and selective breeding over thousands of years for the silkworm industry, not for any other sort of agricultural endeavor. And so I thought it was really interesting that you, in your own experimentations and processes, you're dealing with mulberry trees and silkworms together.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to, well, first I'll speak to it. It's like, yeah, mulberry it's a great plant in that it's very nutritionally, it's a high nutrition plant. It does really well. It can grow in absolute crap conditions. Like even old industrial sites, it's like mulberries just coming up. And the settlers who first came here when they were building America and Canada, creating it as nations, like they brought over mulberry on purpose because they're like, we're gonna create a North American silk industry. Yeah. And they thought in the future, they're just like, oh yeah, mulberry, it'll be great. It'll grow everywhere, and then we can feed our silkworms easily.
And then they got distracted by gold. They all became panhandlers.
Oh yeah. Okay, well, gold has that allure.
Yeah.
And I guess we didn't really foresee. It's like, oh, we'll be making a lot of our clothes out of like polyester and petrochemicals and stuff.
Right,
it's
right.
Like, so that tree that initially was a good thing that we wanted to establish here in North America is now the villain, because there was already a mulberry tree that was here, red mulberry.
Right.
But the problem with that is that it wasn't being cultivated by people here, and because of that, it's not quite as hardy, and it's not as robust as white mulberry. That's from the old world. So, excuse me. Then it's just like, the fruits are dropping everywhere, and they're staining my driveway, and this invasive plant is just taking over all these spaces, and because not as many people are farming silkworms now, those dreams sort of fell a little bit flat. So it's sad because the hero lived long enough to become the villain, and so these mulberry trees are everywhere. And I guess part of my thought with my project is it's just like, if you can't beat them, eat them. Invasive species, yes, they are a problem because when they're introduced to an ecosystem they're not native to, they don't have those controls. They don't have limits. And that leads to things getting overpopulated or them eating more than what they're supposed to, or displacing other things. So, well, one of the best things to do is, why don't I just cut these down? And I'm not removing the roots, so it keeps the soil structure, but when I cut it for the leaves, I'm opening up that space underneath it for other plants to now to grow, and also I'm feeding my caterpillars, because domestic silkworms only eat mulberry, and so like that's ended up with me being able to, mulberries grow everywhere. They are, and no one has a problem with you removing them because, like I said, we don't need them anymore.
Yeah.
So this project is just like, it was so obvious. It's like, why don't I raise silkworms? Because, one of the main components of the artificial diet that I'm creating, which is a big part of the mulberry ventures, is I want to try and create that diet here. And so it's taking invasive species, and we're the controls for it now. We can't expect, I don't know, in my opinion, a lot of the time, if once something's here long enough, nature does find a way to adjust itself so that it becomes part of the web. It's I'm sure when you were growing up, you heard the same thing I did with purple loosestrife. Going to be the only plant in swamps one day, and it's going to take over everything. And it's like, well, that didn't end up really happening.
So
because we end up bringing controls, and like over time, ecosystems will find a way to balance themselves out.
yeah,
Sorry, but
if I was
ahead.
just going to join you on the tangent of invasive plants. If people think invasive like reptiles is a hot topic, invasive plants is pretty fascinating because, as you said, most of the invasive plant problems we have were started by the colonizers of North America. So we're many generations removed from the introduction, and so we're just dealing with the fallout and the consequences. One example where I live is black locust trees are technically an invasive species in my state. And the state recently, just a few years ago, banned them. And like, how do you ban a tree? Well, they banned commercial propagation, and like, they don't want landscape nurseries purposely propagating them and selling them to homeowners as ornamental trees for their house. But like, the cat's out of the bag. But what I've noticed about black locust trees, they only grow on riverbanks in cities. So there's a river that I live close to, a big major river that, empties out into the Atlantic. And if you kayak down stretches of it, many, many stretches of it are very pristine. Northern New England, beautiful, tall, mostly white pine forests right along the riverbanks. But every time you get close to industrialization or city centers, all along the riverbank is black locust. And I think it's because of, the soil had been destroyed at some point by humans, and the black locust is a pioneer species that came in to fill it up. And then the only other place I see it is along railroad tracks for the very same reason. They plowed the beautiful northern New England forest to build a railroad. I don't have any objections to that. And they put down gravel to make sure that the forest wouldn't encroach, but the black locust tree can encroach because it can find its roots in that gravel bed. And so, similar to like white mulberry, where it serves an ecological niche that isn't necessarily that bad, and you sort of only have to look at it, well, when is it actually being destructive to the natural ecosystem? And other times it can live symbiotically with the natural ecosystem, and like you're pointing out, we can find uses for it.
I guess part of the thing is that a black locust is a legume, actually.
Yep.
And so it has that nitrifying bacteria that it can actually, that it improves soil quality. Because like you're saying, this tree is able to live where others can't, and is able to take advantage of poor nutrient soil because it has that that ability to gain the nitrogen.
To fix nitrogen.
Now, with black locust, it is native to North America. And so the problem I have with, because I think the term invasive species gets thrown around a lot these days, and it justifies us doing things to animals and plants that we wouldn't find acceptable in most circumstances for others. So it's like and I understand why people can feel animosity towards these non-native and introduced species, which do often do better in certain circumstances than the native species, because the invasives are tough.
Right.
They only become invasive because they can put up with a lot. And so, yeah, you can hate on them because they're doing well and other species aren't, but that overlooks our role in altering the ecosystem so that there's much more limited space now, and we've impacted that space. So early on, it's even the native populations in North America historically helped spread black walnut because that was a good food tree for them.
Yep.
So black walnut was brought much further north than it naturally occurred. It didn't normally grow this far north into Canada.
Sure.
It's a more southern species. And so, in my opinion, it's no species has a fixed range. And human beings, I guess, have this idea that it's like, oh, if only we could get back to the way things used to be. And it's like, I don't think we ever can. And so, yeah, there's a bunch of species that we don't think of as invasive. Dandelions, I didn't know that. Or, plantains. There's a bunch of species we don't think. Earthworms aren't native to Canada. The glaciers kept them from going this far. But earthworms also have they can be good in the right situations, but they can also have a negative impact in other situations. It's like when you introduce them to a forest that didn't have these super decomposers, because like they do break down organic waste really well. So then you went from a forest with layers and layers of duff and leaf litter to one that now is like, it's much less than it used to be, historically speaking.
Sure.
Obviously, that has an impact on the native fauna that lived in that space. Can we go back to what it used to be? I honestly don't think we can.
Yeah.
And so when you have species also where invasive, so that just means it wasn't there originally, and now it's there and causing problems. So black locust trees, who's to say if human beings weren't even on the scene, whether they would naturally eventually get up to expand the range up here, as they did. In Canada, we have barred owls that, as the climate's gotten warmer, are now making their way westwards. We also have another species that's related to it called spotted owls that are in BC, that are endangered species. And they're smaller than barred owls. And when they go toe-to-toe, barred owls win every time.
Yeah.
And so for a little while, I'm not sure if the program's still there, but like we were shooting barred owls to prevent them from reaching BC.
Gotcha.
And it's just like, how long are you going to try and do this to save the spotted owl? Because it's like, yes, barred owls will negatively impact spotted owls, but you want to know what else impacts them? Cutting down the old growth forest where they nest.
Yeah.
It's like the habitat destruction. We're not building less because of the because of the spotted owls, but we'll kill other species so that we can buy 10 more years.
Interesting.
It's like, it's like I said, calling something invasive gives people justification to treat it less than they would like it. I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah. And I don't.
It allows for actions that.
And I don't claim to know like what's morally superior here. It's just fascinating to think about. Like, if at the end of the day the important thing is that an ecosystem has owls in it, then you maybe just let the barred owls do their thing.
Right.
But then humans would somehow feel responsible that we've done a disservice and an injustice and damage to the environment by possibly being the cause. Ultimately, perhaps we were the cause of the spotted owl going extinct or something. And so we're just trying to maybe do damage control over the effects we have on the environment.
It's at a certain point, it almost feels like it's a little too late. And like, I don't want to be flippant and just be like, well, all species go extinct eventually.
Yeah. Let humanity run amok. Yeah.
And so I'm not advocating for like, just introduce species to wherever.
Right.
As human beings, we have a responsibility to be stewards of the environment. That said, it's important to recognize that keeping the last 2 northern white rhinos alive, you're not going to rebuild the species from 2 individuals. You just won't.
Especially if they don't have suitable habitat.
And then, like you said, you're looking at functionality as well, because would you rather have no owls or an introduced owl that functionally does the same thing as the spotted owl? And that's not to diminish the spotted owl going extinct, regardless of what role we play in that. But it's being a little bit pragmatic about the situation. And I don't know.
Yep. All right. Fun tangent. Thanks for indulging me on the invasive plants. Let's crank out the husbandry at each life stage of a silkworm. So just for the sake of the conversation, assume that maybe I bought some silkworm eggs from you or from another vendor. What do I do with silkworm eggs?
So first thing is that the eggs are the overwintering period of the silkworm. And so they will want to keep them cold before you hatch them.
Okay.
And that is a species that does require the winter diapause in order to hatch.
Yep.
The eggs won't hatch without a cold period. And so if you're not hatching them right away, you need to keep them cold. Or if you're hatching them, know that at room temperature, you're going to have emergence at around between 10 and 12 days. Once the silkworms hatch out,
Mhm.
they're absolutely tiny. And so when you're about to hatch the eggs and when they're very young, very important to keep the humidity appropriately high, but also recognize that insects drown super easily.
Yeah.
So one of the little tricks when you are hatching the eggs of any moth or butterfly is that when you have it in a container, no holes in the container to start, and to add any humidity, you need to do it with your breath. And so you just crack open the container, and
Okay.
the moisture in your breath is enough
Yep.
moisture to keep the humidity high enough for the eggs without actually creating water droplets, which would drown any of the new hatched caterpillars.
Right.
And so once they hatch out, you want to wait for probably about 24 hours before you offer them their first meal. They've had the yolk and the egg to sort of like sustain them up to hatch. And then after they hatch, their first meal is actually the eggshell. Nature,
Cool.
waste not, want not
Yeah.
type approach. When you offer them their first meal, I prefer to offer it as actually the first thing I give them is usually a bit of artificial chow,
Mhm.
because when you offer them leaves, the fresh cut leaves are still respiring. And if you are not very careful with how much you offer them, then you're going to get humidity buildup.
Yep.
Because the key with raising silkworms is ventilation levels. So we went from newly hatched, no holes in the lid. Then a couple days later, you want a couple more holes. You want to put some holes in that lid, but not too many, because small insects desiccate super quickly.
Mhm.
So you get your ventilation correct, the amount of food you're offering them, and then the frass. When they're just tiny, you don't need to worry about that. That's barely dust. The whole growth period of the silkworm is completed in just over 30 days. The amount of growth that happens in these animals is just astonishing.
Yeah.
It's like they are getting thousands of times the size that they were when they first hatched. And so you're calibrating the amount of food you're giving to them, because the caterpillars do best when they have constant access to food. And then the other aspect is waste management. And so as the caterpillars get bigger, you start offering more food, increasing the ventilation, and then you can get and then you have to do something about the waste. So like I said, at first, it's not really an issue. But as they get bigger, as all animals get bigger, they create bigger poops.
Yeah.
And so that's when you want to start moving them onto screens, so that the frass drops right through. Makes for easier cleanup, and also you can remove the food a lot easier, because with that that increasing ventilation, you're also making sure that the mold's controlled, which is, I guess, the three trifectors of raising your silkworms: the ventilation, the food, and the waste management. The waste management is important because mold is a number one killer of insects.
Yep.
If you want to call any killer, that's mold. And domestic silkworms have an awful immune system.
Right.
If you sneeze on them, it's like, I guess I'll get new ones, because
Yeah.
they just do not take any bacterial contamination. They can't handle mold. And frass and humidity and nutrient rich food, it's like that's a recipe for mold everywhere.
Right.
And so It's very important to do the clean out. The cleaning out is just as important as the feeding.
Yeah. What's a good temperature to let them grow at?
I'd say they do just fine at room temperature. They don't need any
Okay.
supplemental heat.
All right. They don't need it to be hot. Okay.
And that's especially important when you have the eggs. Like you don't want to keep them too hot. Keeping them, yeah.
Okay.
If you're comfy, they're comfy.
When does a little batch of silkworm worms grow out of a like deli cup? Do you ever move them up to something bigger?
Yeah, I'd say so. After about usually by the time they're in there, so each growth stage between a molt. I'm not sure how familiar you are with insect biology and stuff, so I'm not going to start throwing out terms, jargon. An instar is the stages in between molts, right? And so by the time they are on their third instar, they've gotten some length to them now. You can even start for certain varieties if you're raising like I have tiger silkworms, which are like the black version, or the all dark version, and then I have zebra silkworms that like once they start getting big enough, you can start seeing the coloration on them, or like they get to a decent once they're over a half inch. Then you should start moving them to trays, but you still want that humidity to be kept relatively on the higher side.
Yep.
But you do still want good airflow. That's important. Is like just because you keep something humid doesn't mean that you don't provide ventilation. It does require a little bit more work, obviously, because it's easy to just keep things stagnant and humid.
Yeah.
But that's when you run into problems with motor.
If they were
it's like as they get bigger.
If they were in like plastic shoe boxes or plastic sweater boxes, do you need a lid at all? Like, are they going to climb out?
No.
No.
You don't need a lid.
Cool.
I have raised them in plastic shoe boxes because it's easy to just do different lids for each stage. And like when I first start, it's so when they get to that second and then third instars, you start putting holes in the lids, and then by the time they've grown to say like a little over an inch, then you can start doing half screen lids, and then by the time they're bigger than that, it's like you don't need lids. And the lids were just to keep the humidity in. The worms literally they don't go anywhere. It's been a bit of a surprise for I didn't start with silkworms. I started with other caterpillars, and so it's just like if I didn't have a lid on them and you don't have food for them, they'll just go looking for food.
Right. That's what you
The
said.
silkworms are literally just waiting for you to bring it to them.
Okay. And so I have white mulberry trees on my property. So if I'm doing this in season during, spring, summer, fall, or spring and summer, really, I could do this by just picking leaves every day and throwing some leaves at the worms. That would work out okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I prefer to use the fresh leaves because it keeps the mortality lower, actually. The worms naturally should be eating leaves. We have just kept them long enough that we know we've studied them enough, and they're readily available enough to human beings that we've figured out kind of like how to make the artificial diet, which does use the leaves as a component, but you can never mimic nature. You can never do better than nature.
Give people, obviously, if you buy the artificial diet because you don't have access to the trees, or you're doing this, in the wintertime when the trees don't have leaves on them, just, obviously the package of artificial diet has instructions on it, but just give people an idea of what they might be getting into. If they've never done this and they want to give it a try, how do you prep the diet, and how often do you have to prep the diet, and what is it like feeding it out every day?
So the diet usually is like, it's fairly simple in its preparation. There's some aspects you have to remember in that it's silkworms, like I said, awful immune system, so you want to make sure you're prepping it clean. You're washing you're putting it in clean containers, and you're washing your hands, and you're taking precautions to make it as clean as possible during the preparation. You often add to it. It has to be hot enough that the agar in it can gelatinize and solidify. Once you have sort of added the water to the diet and mixed it thoroughly enough that the consistency is good, You let it set, and then you cool it. And then at this point, you can like cut it up into portion it. And then the important part is storing it correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So in the refrigerator, it can store for months. Sorry, in the freezer, it can store for months. In the refrigerator, you're looking at weeks. And in at just room temperature, you might have it for a couple days. And so at that point, it's you're dialing it into the number of silkworms you have, because silkworms won't eat dry diet.
Mm-hmm.
If once it dries out, gets all crumbly, they'll just turn their nose up at it.
Gotcha.
If it's too wet though, then they won't feed it on it either, because it's not anything that they can really bite into. So that balance is important. But like once you have it prepped and you have it stored properly, it's just a matter of portioning it out in the right rate to make sure your silkworms always have food available, but don't have so much food that stuff goes uneaten, because uneaten food just becomes moldy food, and then mold becomes dead caterpillars.
Right. Okay. All right. And so for most of us, we would then, if we have success this far, we're just going to be feeding out caterpillars when they're at the right size and buying more eggs. But if we want to try to get them through the pupa stage into moths, is there anything we have to do to make that happen?
So it's important so if you're trying to do the full cycle of a silkworm, once they become large, and I'm talking like full grown caterpillars, silkworms need somewhere to spin their cocoon. And so you'll see them become more active than they ever were at any point in their life so far.
Yeah.
They'll start looking for somewhere to make that cocoon, and they need anchor points. And so the best thing, like, traditionally, they give them branches and stuff, and then the caterpillars would make their cocoons within a set of branches, so they could all just tie off on those points.
Mm-hmm.
Because another fascinating thing about silkworms is like the cocoon itself that they make, that's spun with one continuous thread. Commercially, when you're making commercial silk, like you have to kill the pupae inside, because when it emerges, the caterpillar needs to, or the nymph spits an enzyme that melts away a window for it to emerge from that cocoon, because otherwise it would be trapped.
Mhm.
And by doing that, the moth ruins the that singular thread.
Right.
Now it's a bunch of threads.
Yeah.
And so commercially, yes, they will throw all the cocoons in boiling water. And when I won't go into that, because that's another tangent. But
Yeah.
then they'll remove the pupae and use that as food for chickens or people food themselves. I haven't tried them yet, but that's a sizable little bite.
Yeah.
And so if you're just raising them to breed them,
Mm-hmm.
then you let the adults emerge, and if they are in the presence of each other, the females will be emitting pheromones that just drive the males wild, and the mating happens with pretty much no effort on your part, as long as the sexes are together.
Okay.
And then it's important to have a surface for the female to lay her eggs onto. If you just have her in a bare container, she'll lay her eggs, but then you have to somehow get those eggs off that surface to refrigerate.
Gotcha.
For their overwinter period, right? And so it's usually easiest if you give her paper towel or cardboard or some surface that you can easily manage for her to lay those eggs on. And there will be hundreds of eggs. Insects are that's like a numbers game for them.
Right.
It's just like, just do lots. And so you will have lots of eggs, and then the key to overwintering them successfully is to make sure that they don't dry out too much. So the fridges are really dry.
Mm.
They desiccate everything that goes into them. It's so whether you're overwintering pupae inside your fridge or you're overwintering eggs, you need to make sure that the eggs stay humid. Now that's different than that. You don't keep them wet. If you keep them wet, they'll just get moldy,
Yeah.
and then by keeping them humid, you give them all the moisture they require, so that they don't dry out and desiccate, which just leads to death as well. So you want to do sort of a two container system. Bigger container, wet paper towel on the bottom, smaller containers inside with holes in the lids that just have the eggs on the surface they were laid on. That way they stay humid without being on a wet surface.
Touching the wet paper towel. Yep. Okay. Cool.
So yeah, that
cool. All right. Yeah, that touches base on all the life cycles. I'm planning on trying it this year. I want to see if I can get silkworm culture down myself, at least for the summer months, when I have mulberry leaves available. So that'll be cool.
It's definitely easier when you have the leaves available. Yeah. That's for sure.
Right.
As I'm finding out myself, because like the diet is more than just ground up dried leaves reconstituted.
Yeah.
As we spoke about earlier. So the leaves, you're gonna get the best survival rates. You're gonna get the healthiest silkworms. It's important to remember though that make sure that they're clean leaves. So you don't want bird poop all over them, and you don't want them to be dusty where you collect them. If you are someone like me who doesn't have mulberry right in your backyard or on your property, that you don't collect it from like because it grows everywhere. It's tempting. It's like, oh, it's on the roadside. It's like, it's probably not the best quality.
Dust and
then if
pollutants.
it rains, and if it rains, make sure you pat the leaves dry. You don't want to be feeding them wet leaves because that will also lead to bacterial problems that causes issues as well.
Gotcha. Cool. All right. Well, we've been talking for quite a while. I feel like we're just sort of scratching the surface about a couple various insect topics. Like it's a whole world in of itself, insects and nutrition. So thanks for joining me for today's conversation. Where could people in the audience find you online if they want to follow you, if they want to ask you some questions, or if they're in Canada, if they want to shop with you?
I have a website, OntarioInvertFarm.com. But we're also on Instagram. That's got a lot of shorter videos showing my stock and some of the processes and a lot of the insects that I work with, as well as we're present on Facebook and have a YouTube channel as well that I plan to be doing a lot of. I'm going to be uploading the whole mulberry adventures up till this point up there soon, and then also the part 2, putting together the artificial diet from the mulberry that I've been collecting this past season. So
cool. Yeah, that's fascinating. I'll be following along to see how you accomplish that. So cool. Well, I will put all those links in the show notes for today's episode. Thanks, Jordan, for joining me. Guys, check out Ontario Invert Farm. I would really love to hear from the audience. If you guys have any experience culturing an interesting or less common feeder insect, tell me about it. Or maybe you just want to share some tips and tricks on how to do it better. You can find me on Instagram, Frograck, or email me at frograck@gmail.com. That's it for today's show. Thanks for listening. Tune in next time.
Thanks for having me, Joe.